So the theme of social role valorization that we're going to talk about now is mindsets and expectancies. This is a very important theme because our mindsets actually come out or get expressed in actions that we engage in. So what do I mean by a mindset? Well, a mindset would be a set of assumptions or beliefs, or a mindset can be an attitude or an outlook that things will happen one way, or that certain things will happen and that other things will not happen, or that things will happen in a particular way. As well, a mindset can be thought of as a fixed mental attitude that predetermines your responses and your interpretations of situations. Now, in fact, our mindsets are composed of many different things. Our beliefs, our values, our knowledge, our experiences, our emotions, and these factors are all intertwined. So for example, you may have a very strong belief, and that then combines with your emotions, which reinforces that belief. And it is important for us to note that sometimes mindsets are very conscious, we're very aware of them, and other times they can be unconscious and we're not really aware that we're holding certain mindsets. Here are some common mindsets about students with disabilities. So one mindset is that students who are finished with their high school years need to move to a special transition program which is located in the high school. And another mindset is that students with disabilities will get much more out of being together with other students with disabilities than they would if they were included in with typical peers. Another very common mindset is that, this is relevant for inclusive post-secondary education, is that students with disabilities, particularly students with intellectual disabilities, are simply incapable of being a college, a university, a technical school student, and they're incapable of being fully included in not only classes, but dorm life, social life, and so forth. And going along with that is the next mindset that is also very common, is that students with disabilities would really not benefit much from being a college, a university, or a technical school student. And instead, the common mindset is that students with disabilities, particularly intellectual disabilities, need a special program in order to learn competencies for adult life. In contrast, here are some mindsets that are very prevalent in inclusive post-secondary education. First of all, that all students can learn in typical settings, and the emphasis there is on all. And all students can benefit, again, the emphasis is on all, from inclusive post-secondary higher education. That students in higher education, and again, we could say all students, should have access to a variety of supports. Students with disabilities do not need to be in special programs with other people with disabilities. And related to that, of course, would be that, that students with disabilities, and particularly intellectual disabilities, can be fully included in classes and in campus life. These are just some of the assumptions. I guess I'll end with this one, which is another kind of big assumption, is that inclusive post-secondary education has the power to really challenge some of those stereotypes that were represented in that first example of mindsets that I gave you. So I really recommend that you have opportunities to get together with people and talk about the mindsets of inclusive post-secondary education. Not just people who are working in inclusive post-secondary education, but people throughout the different campuses where inclusive post-secondary education exists. So that could include students with and without disabilities. That could include instructors, faculty, administrators, throughout whatever learning situation it is. really coming together and thinking about, well, okay, what do we really mean by inclusive post-secondary education? What are our mindsets about this? And what does inclusive post-secondary education look like? What are our mindsets about what it should be? And what are our mindsets about what are the benefits of inclusive post-secondary education? And the benefits for students, for the teachers, for the instructors, for university communities, for families, and so forth. A very important area to think about our mindsets would be, what kinds of mindsets do we have about what supports are needed to promote inclusive post-secondary education for students and across campuses? And how should those supports be given? So I really recommend that you get together with colleagues, with students, and have conversations about these questions. And you will see in those conversations there will be a number of mindsets that are reflected. And it will be a very interesting and I think a pretty compelling discussion, and would really help in terms of clarifying some of the practices in inclusive post-secondary education. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about what mindsets are and giving examples of them and making that recommendation of what we can do to take a look at our mindsets. Why have we spent all that time on this topic? Well, because mindsets are really powerful. They shape and direct our actions. They inform our actions. And honestly, they can be so strong that it's almost impossible to change them. You've probably had that experience. You've met somebody with a mindset that they have committed to, and that's the end of it. And it could be a mindset that isn't all that helpful, or it doesn't lead to helpful action, I guess I should say. It could be a mindset that is really helpful. I remember encountering this in one of my daughter's teachers, who was her 4th grade teacher. And our daughter had always been fully included and was going to be included in 4th grade in this teacher's classroom. And the teacher, even though Mary had been successfully included since kindergarten and was known in the school, and other teachers talked about the experience of inclusion, how wonderful it was for everybody and so forth, this 4th grade teacher just did not embrace that mindset. Her mindset was the opposite. And honestly, it was so interesting. No matter what was shown to her, what the kids did, what actually the families did, what my daughter did, her mindset was not changing. Actually, mindsets can prevent us from seeing things that we would have otherwise seen. And I think the example I just gave you of the 4th grade teacher was a really good example of that even though inclusion was right in front of her, she simply couldn't see it because of her mindset. And that happens in inclusive post-secondary education as well. On the other hand, mindsets are very powerful because they can enable or help us to see things that we otherwise would not have seen. So for example, I live in Pennsylvania, and we have an inclusive post-secondary consortium here. And there was a time when there were hardly any institutions of higher learning or institutions of post-secondary education that were inclusive. And yet there were some real strong people in the state who embraced the mindset and believed that it could happen. And they'd also had the opportunity to see inclusive post-secondary education in other places, which strengthened their mindset. And that mindset then led to the creation of our consortium and a number of schools, institutions of higher learning that have inclusive post-secondary education throughout Pennsylvania today. That all started with mindsets. So you might be familiar with these things. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it. So seeing is believing. I'm sure you've heard that and maybe thought that yourself as well. I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't believed it. Believing is seeing it. Our mindsets can shed light. They can enable us to see things that we otherwise might not have seen. Over and over again, I have seen in inclusive post-secondary education, where there is a mindset to embrace the ideas, that people can see it, they can imagine it, they can develop a vision of it. And their mindsets become stronger and stronger as they get an opportunity to be involved in inclusive post-secondary education. Now, of course, for positive mindsets to do any good, they have to be converted into action. I've always been inspired of a school principal who worked in a very impoverished area in New York City, and her school had very little funding, and she had a very positive mindset that the students would succeed, that the teachers would be excellent teachers, and that they would all become a very strong learning community. And that expectation, in spite of not having many resources, was realized. The school completely was turned around as a result of converting that positive mindset into action. And the faculty, the teachers, and the principal figured out ways to build that learning community so that every one of those students has graduated with a high school diploma and has gone on to some further post-secondary education. Now that's an example of a positive mindset that was put into practice and put into action. I just wanted to share with you kind of a contrast of mindsets. So one is the can-do mindset. In other words, well, I'm not sure how this is going to happen, but we'll figure it out. Or there's the can't-do mindset. There's no way that we could possibly do that. So I want to give you some examples of the can-do mindset and what that can bring about, because that's inclusive post-secondary education is really about a can-do mindset. I'm thinking about a student who was attending university in an inclusive post-secondary initiative, and she really wanted to become a member of a group of women who, this group went out on a monthly basis on pub crawls, and sometimes some of the members got drunk. And so this student really wanted to have that opportunity. She liked some of the women in this group, and she also had not, even though she was of legal age, had not had an opportunity to go to pubs, not had an opportunity to try different kinds of drinks. And so, she talked to her peers. She talked confided in somebody who was an advisor to her in the inclusive post-secondary initiative, and she got advice. And everybody came around her. Nobody said, oh, you can't do that. It's too dangerous. Something might happen to you. You might get into trouble. You don't really want to go drinking. You don't really know what it's like to be drinking. Instead, the people listened to the student and had a can-do mindset. And so the advisor talked to the student. Actually, it was a graduate student who gave her some advice about when you go on pub crawls like this, what to look for, how to be safe, and so forth. And of course, she had her phone if there was any problem that she encountered and she needed assistance with. And so she successfully joined this group, has been on a number of pub crawls, and has thoroughly enjoyed herself. So that's an example. It's kind of a small example, but it's an example of that can-do mindset that can make all the difference. So here's another example of a can-do mindset. This is a student who is a university student in an inclusive post-secondary initiative. And this is a student who, when she was in high school, she wanted to go to university. And she had a number of people saying to her in her high school, you can't do that. You will never be able to go to university. You can't get into university. And what would you study? And how would you manage the being on the campus? And how would you manage the work the professors would give you? And this student persisted. She couldn't answer all those questions because she hadn't been to university yet. But she had that mindset of can do. And in fact, This student has done very well in university because not only did she have that mindset, but the people around her have the mindset that she can do it. And so this is a student who, without that mindset and fortitude and the can-do mindset of other people around her, probably never would have had the opportunity to engage in inclusive post-secondary education. So hope you remember that. If nothing else, remember the importance of a can-do mindset. So in conclusion, we just want to leave you with a few points. Remember that it's really important to think about what are our mindsets, what are the mindsets that guide our work in inclusive post-secondary education. Remember that we really want to work to be conscious about those mindsets, because lots of times we hold mindsets unconsciously and act on them. And lastly, remember that actually mindsets really matter because they impact on our actions, which ultimately means that they'll impact on other people. So thank you for listening. I hope you've gotten some information that will be helpful to you.